This session is called Updating Your Land Use Ordinances. I'm Brent Bateman. I'm from the law firm of Denton, Durham, Jones & Pinniger. I know most of you. Those of you that I don't know, I do look forward to meeting and chatting with you. We're hoping to provide some answers here. I'm going to let Ryan introduce himself.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Brent. Ryan Beck. I'm the Vice President of Planning with Envision Utah.
Thanks, Ryan. So this session, in my opinion, follows perfectly with the last couple. And the reason why is because we just got unloaded on, and when I say we, I mean all of us. This presentation is going to be specifically focused to local governments. But if you're not a local government person, either a staffer or an elected official or whatever, this is still something that you need to know about, because this is a standard that we need to hold people to, obviously. We just got unloaded on by the legislature. We just heard about all that. And, of course, as we all sat in here and listened to all that, the pile got higher and higher and higher. And there is going to be a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of work in particular involved in updating your ordinances. And so we're kind of here to hit on the most important things that we think that you need to do in order to make this possible in your community. Okay? Now, if you out in the hallway, there's an article that I put together. It's not in final form. It's a draft. But it's an article on this subject that I put together. I hope you'll get it, and I hope you'll read it. I am not going to go through that article. Okay? I am going to just hit the highlights because we don't have time. Ryan and I agree that our session could be 2 or 3 hour session, and nobody wants that. So we're just gonna hit the important parts, okay? But I hope that you'll take and read that article, because that article is an attempt to kind of provide an outline of a way a local government can keep their ordinances updated, and sort of what they can do over time to make sure their ordinances are updated. I'm a believer that even with all the things that are going on right now, you do not have to spend a ton of money to do this. You do not have to hire necessarily an outside consultant to come in and overhaul your ordinance. I am not a believer in eating the whole elephant at once. I'm a believer in taking time and eating the elephant a bite at a time, but you actually have to do it, right? And so when I talk to people about this, and my time as a state ombudsman, and since then, I talk to people, and they always have the same question to me, and that's, how do we start? And that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to tell you how to start, and we're going to try to tell you what steps to take immediately and what steps to take over time in order to get the most important things done as far as what you need to do in your ordinances. Now, I just want to start by telling you 2 stories. One is a story, and they're quick. One is a story about a planning commission hearing that I recently watched. It didn't recently occur. It actually occurred during the legislative session when all of this was going down. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most advanced planning commissions in the state. It has 2 professional, and not just professional planners on the planning commission, but they're 2 members of the first presidency of planning in the state. And it has an attorney and some other community members who are very advanced. This is a super advanced planning commission. And they were talking about what the legislature is doing this year, a lot of the stuff that we just heard. And they expressed a ton of frustration. And I understand that completely. And the frustration was, like someone mentioned over here, who's going to pay for this? Where are we going to find the time and the money? We are already working super hard. Our people are overworked. We're at our planning commission meetings till midnight every night already. And now what are we going to do? Right? Well, I think I have the answer for that. The second question, the second story I want to tell you was something that happened to me just this week to illustrate the importance of this subject. Okay? Just this week, I was on the phone with a small, very rural local government. If you think the town you come from is rural, you don't know. This town is very rural. They weren't in southern Utah, so you don't know them. But some of the people involved in this, many of the people involved in this were in this room. And they called me and they invited me to their planning commission, and they paid good money to have me come, because I don't do things for free anymore, just so you know. They paid good money to have me come and talk to them about a recent advisory opinion that they'd received and lost. Okay? And I reviewed the advisory opinion, I reviewed all the paperwork, and I went to their planning commission and I said, yes, the ombudsman was 100% correct. And I don't always say that, as Jordan will know, because Jordan, I don't know what he's doing half the time. But no, Jordan's amazing. Yeah, if you show up on time, maybe I wouldn't attack you like that. But the advisory opinion was 100% correct, and it didn't even occur to them that any of the things in the advisory opinion were even going to be issues. Why? Because they have a procedure for how they do things, and they have a step-by-step instructions. When people come in with an application, they say, this is how you do it, A, B, C, D, and E, right? And that's worked fine for them for 25 years. And what happened is that a very advanced land use attorney in this state went up there and opened up their ordinances and says, okay, I'm going to follow your ordinances. And you know what? Their ordinances weren't even close to the procedure they've been using for 25 years. Not even in the neighborhood. And when I told them, I said, it's your ordinances that matter, not what you've been doing for 25 years. It is what it says in your ordinance that they have a right to follow that. And by them following that, that has left them in a horrible lurch, right? And they have no idea what's going on in the state. They have no idea what the latest legislation is. They're literally doing a 1980s style approval in this place. And it has put them in a world of trouble. And I had to tell them that in planning commission, in a city council meeting, just this week. This is for reals, okay? So the point is that this is not, I'm not talking to somebody else. I'm talking to you, right? No matter how good you think your ordinances are, no matter what your processes are, I'm telling you, you need updates. You need to update your ordinances. Even if you have an advanced attorney, I'm telling you that Gary Crane City needs to update its ordinances in some event or other, right? We all do, right? Some are in really deep trouble. Some just need a little bit of help. But you all need to update your ordinances. So, having said that little introduction, here I want to go to the next slide, and then the next one. So I have put together this little step-by-step plan. It's just my ideas. There may be other ideas, okay? I'm not going to go through all the steps. This is generally what's reflected in my article that I wrote out there, right? But I put these steps all up on the screen so that if any of them in particular strike you as something you want to ask about, ask, right? Go ahead and bring it up, okay? But this is the first step, and I think this is the clearly most important step. And I base this on the fact that although most cities have not done this, the cities that have done this have reported to me huge success and huge happiness with this. But it's a hard one to do, right? And people just have difficulty letting go. And that is to free up your planning commission. Okay, so many places still to this day are planning commission meeting until midnight, listening to permit applications, listening to conditional uses, listening to subdivision applications, and worst of all, listening to public hearings, right? And of course, if that's your situation, you don't want to have to do any of this extra work because you're already there till midnight. And you don't have to be. You don't have to be. Okay, first of all, you don't have to have all those public hearings, and those are what is killer. Those is what makes those meetings difficult, and they're a waste of your time. And secondly, the Planning Commission does not have to hear every application. The Planning Commission doesn't have to be the ones that goes through, every debate and everything on everything that comes to the city. Now, there's, some cities every city has different circumstances, right? And I'm not saying that it's not good for the Planning Commission to hear some applications or deal with some things. And I'm not saying that it's not maybe even sometimes good to have a public hearing, okay? But the point is that the cities that I know who have done this, who have freed up their planning commission and allowed them to do their job, have reported to me that this has changed everything for them, right? The planning commission is called the planning commission. They're not called the conditional use permit commission. Their job, if you look at the state statute, their job is to plan, right? And you need planning. I don't care how big or small your town is. I don't care, you know, whether things change. I don't care if you receive 5 building permits a year. You need planning at some level or another, right? Now, part of planning is not just saying it is this. It's saying I need this here, I need that there, you know, and I want this zone over here. That's part of planning. But a huge part of planning, the Planning Commission's job, is to update your ordinances. And obviously this year, that's going to be a huge job. And that's the Planning Commission's job. The Planning Commission is supposed to have these debates and these discussions and figure out what to do and take that information to the city council, right? So that the city council can spend minimal time on that and get it passed. That's the whole reason the Planning Commission exists. Otherwise, the city council would just do the whole thing. Sir. Apparently not.
Is now. Hey, Brent, Bruce Jenkins.
I know you, Bruce. You don't have to give me your name.
Yeah, okay. Again, planning commissions, great people,
Yeah.
volunteers.
Right.
When I say lay, that's no disrespect, that's actually an honor. Those
Sure.
of us who think we're
But
educated.
it means they're teachers and librarians, not
we gotta-
professional planners.
We have more issues than the lay folks, right? But if they're the ones that are trying to write and plan stuff, it seems to me they need the assistance of a professional planner, someone that knows how to write these things. Otherwise, you know what direction to go to, but you might end up in a worse direction if you don't write your ordinances correctly. So that's from all you're saying, that's a concern.
Yeah, and I get that, right? And I think what you're saying is partially true and partially not true. Okay. When it comes to this, the tendency is to just say, let's find some money, let's hire a planner, and let's have the planner just do this, right? And there are planners who do it. Okay. First of all, let's just kick that right out the window. Sorry, John. You know, I've just maybe lost you some jobs, but you know how it goes. So, but there are other options besides spending money on this, okay, and besides hiring a professional planner. Sometimes that's a good idea, right? But it's not a good idea every time, and it definitely is not a situation where, hello, professional planner, we need a new whatever, we need a new subdivision code. Come in here and do it for us. That, I think, is a mistake, okay? The right thing to do is to spend some time at least outlining what you need, what you want and what you need and what you want it to look like, okay? Then there's a lot of resources, a lot of places to go to actually get the language put together in a good way. One is every city should have a city attorney, right? And I know that a lot of places, especially the smaller places, would rather have their teeth pulled than call that guy, right? But I'd call that guy for sure. Okay. There are the local government. What are they called? The regional councils. What are those called? Yeah, the AOGs, Associations of Governments. They almost always have planners on staff that would just love to jump in and help you. I work a lot with the 6 county guys, Travis Keel and those guys there. Fantastic. There's also stealing. What's wrong with stealing? You know, if you have another town that's similar to you, you know, look up their ordinances. See what they're doing. Is there anything wrong with that? Zero.
Sometimes you steal moldy bread, though, you know?
Yeah, there's no question. There's no question. And I see that you, as soon as you said that, you hid. We're just going to call you the moldy guy. There's no question about that. So stealing is not the ultimate answer, right? But taking the time to take something to start with and hashing it out is always good. There's the ombudsman's office. The ombudsman, you call the ombudsman and say, what about this language? And they will tell you what they think. And that costs nothing. And there is these grant funds that are available now when you do have to pay somebody to get some help to do this. It's worth doing, okay? But in order to do that, as I said, to sort of get back to the topic, you have got to free up your planning commission because that is what they're supposed to do. And they should not have to be there till midnight every night, and especially to get this job done. Now, I suspect that with this, and I hope that with this new subdivision ordinance that's coming out, this is one of the reasons why local governments were given so much time to put it into play. But I suspect with this new subdivision ordinance coming out that soon some people are going to start working on it. I hope soon some people are going to start working on it. And it's going to provide a great opportunity for thievery at that point, right? But my concern with this is, and this is what always happens, it seems like, my concern is that no one's going to start working on it until 2 weeks before the deadline. And that's what seems to always happen. And just please don't do that, okay? Go into your, look at your planning commission and how they're spending their time. A good rule of thumb, in my opinion, is if they're not spending at least half of their time on planning tasks, at least half of their time on planning tasks, then they're out of balance. Every single meeting should involve some discussion that's related to planning. Every single meeting should involve some discussion about an ordinance. Let's look at this ordinance and see if we want to make any changes to it. About a zone or a plan. Every single meeting, the planning commission should spend time doing that. And if you're spending until midnight hearing other things, you've got to rethink that. That is not the planning commission's job. The planning commission is to make this job easier. And then at least half of their time doing some public hearings, whatever, doing some application stuff is fine, right? But at least half of their time on public hearings. Now, I know some of you won't do that. That is hard, okay? It's so hard to give things up, especially if it's something we've been doing for a long time and it seems to work fine for us, okay? And a lot of times what you're going to see is your elected officials are going to be saying, I am not giving up this or that, right? I am not taking this, I'm not giving staff, for example, or I'm not taking away public hearings, or I'm not doing conditional use permit hearings, or whatever else, okay? I get that, I understand that, but I got to tell you, and this kind of goes with this whole subdivision ordinance thing. I predict this is what's going to happen. I predict that most places, and particularly the places in this room, the local governments represented in this room, will do something about it, and will try to come into compliance. The fact that you're here in this room means that you care, okay? But I predict there's going to be a lot of local governments that are going to completely ignore it. And they're going to say, either they're going to just say, we're going to just be willfully ignorant and keep doing the things we want to do, or they're going to say, I don't care what the legislature says. Every year they're putting the hurt on us in some way, and I'm tired of it. And we're not going to do it, right? And that may be one of your communities that does that, but communities will be doing that, I guarantee it. And the same goes for affordable housing, attainable housing issues. That is super important, and Todd's going to talk about in just a second. Because you have to do that too, okay? I'm telling you, if you are one of those cities, you are the problem, okay? And what I mean by that is the legislature has been doing all this, doing what they did this year, which was extraordinary, Extraordinary what they did this year. I mean, they kicked local government in the teeth in multiple ways. The reason why they do that is because they hear stories. And what do they hear stories about? They hear stories about local governments who have not complied with what they asked them to do. And so they squeeze tighter and tighter and tighter every year, right? So if you're sitting here thinking, I don't care about this, or I'm not going to do this, or this is going to be a hard sell to my elected officials or whatever, I'm concerned for you because you're the problem, and you are the reason why even next year it's going to be worse. You know, if we don't come into compliance and we don't find a way to do this, you know, it's just gonna get worse and worse every year until the legislature finally feels like they can back off of us. Any opposing viewpoints? I mean, that's a lot of editorializing on my part, but I have the microphone, not you. Yeah.
So just a comment about some smaller areas, because one of the viewpoints is so much of this is a Wasatch Front problem being applied statewide. And I'm a city manager, and I kind of view that there's also a lack of capacity. There's a lot of towns out there that don't even know the conversation's happening based on their level of engagement. So not as a pushback, but kind of like what Gary Crane commented on earlier is they haven't even made the changes from 3 sessions ago, right? And so it's just happening so fast. But anyway, not to say that it's just pushback, but I think a lot of the frustration or, just capacity and governance is also just an issue, just to bring that up.
Absolutely, and that is real. I don't mean to discount that or anything, because that is absolutely real, right? But we've come to it this year, in my opinion, okay? This is the other side, this is the rest of my 10 steps, right? But go back to the first thing, okay? We've come to it this year, and if you're wondering how to start now, this is my advice to you, even if you're in that situation, okay? My advice to you, again, is to look at your planning commission and free them up so that they can plan, and then immediately jump into this year's legislation and getting that in place, okay? You know about it. There's other sources to find out about it. We talked about it a lot. Call Jordan. He'll tell you. But immediately start implementing this year's legislation. You know what? If you spend the entire year working on that, and at the end of the year you're ready to go, no one is going to get on your case. Everyone's going to understand. Everyone's going to say, you did what you needed to do this year, okay? And then, right, next year's legislation, because by next year it's going to be how long it's going to take, right? But make next year's legislation a priority, right? The other things on my top 10 list are the things to do once those are done. I guarantee if you're sitting there thinking, if we free up our planning commission to plan, they won't know what to do. I guarantee you'll stay busy, because then you have to start working on last year's legislation, the year before that legislation, the year before that legislation, right? And then you need to start working on, and in the meantime, you're still trying to solve problems and stuff like that are in your city. I mean, that's always an ongoing problem. But what you're describing is exactly what I dealt with at this very rural town this week, is exactly that. Capacity, no professionals on staff. They barely know who their city attorney is. And frankly, I won't say what I was going to say. John, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to just at least mention that consultants steal too, okay? Just to make sure everybody's clear on that.
And if you had a professional planner, that's the first thing he'll probably do, is he'll probably look in other codes to take it.
Having done a community that was doing whatever they were doing and had an ordinance that said something else, all I got to really say about that is make sure you change the name of the town that you stole that from, okay? One thing I've found effective, and I'd just like to add that to the conversation, especially if you can't free up everybody as much as you're saying you could, is a work session. There's a lot of communities that don't do work sessions, but that's when you can talk about those ordinances freely and get through that. Sometimes the hour before your regular meeting. If you're trying to do the work at midnight, you're never going to get it done. And that's just my thought.
I totally agree with you, John, and a work session is so the way to go. I have been to so many meetings that went till midnight, and during that entire time, I've sat here and made a list of things that are unnecessary. Reasons why we could have got out of here at 8:30. And every time, and it happens all the time. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Twilla County and an elected official as a county councilman, Benton County Commissioner. It's interesting to sit here and this is all driven by affordable housing. What is affordable housing? I do not believe for 1 minute streamlining the process is going to make housing more affordable.
Okay.
As we go back to who's driving this issue, it seems to me developers are never going to cut us a slice of reducing the price. If they can make this money, God bless them. But I do not believe by all this process, the ordinances we've been forced to refine, and they probably need to be refined, is not going to make housing more affordable.
So that's a perfect segue into what Ryan has to say. And we should go to that because that's exactly what he's going to address. But I'm just going to respond to that and then have this question right here. Is there one here too? I'm just going to respond to that by saying true or not. That may be absolutely true. And I think some of the steps that the legislature has taken to make housing more affordable has been a waste of time. But whether that's true or not, we're stuck with it. And now we have to do it because the legislature said do it.
Speaking of stealing ordinances, we at Mill Creek have worked on our subdivision ordinance and have a brand new one, and we saw this legislation coming. So ours is pretty good. If you want to steal it, send me an email and I'll send it to you in Word. But with the provision that if you find a problem in it, tell me so we can fix it.
Before you come to this conference and tell
Yeah,
everybody,
before you
right?
come next year and say, do
Okay,
you know what
so
those guys did?
if you consider John Brems to be any kind of attorney at all, give him a call. No, he's one of the best city attorneys in the state, in my opinion.
So I'm just curious, so it talks about incorporating this year's legislation and last year's legislation and so on. And in this format, it seems like we're talking, referencing House bills and so on. At what point does it come into code so that if we go look at subdivision regulations in state code, it's incorporated in there?
So that's a great question. So your local code needs to comply with the state code. It does not need to necessarily mirror it. It needs to comply with it. And what that basically means is it means to not conflict with it. The state code needs to say, you need to follow the state code, right? Now, conflict is an interesting word, right? Does that mean that you can't have your own things in there for your own, uses? Like, for example, up in northern Utah, they don't have clay soils, okay? So you have something in your code about clay soils, yes, okay? But that doesn't conflict with the local code. What would conflict in this case of subdivisions is having a three-step process, right? Which a lot of places have. Now it's a two-step process. That if it's in your local code to have a three-step process, that conflicts, okay? And that goes for just not the subdivision part. It goes for anything in the code. And so I always say it's a good idea to look at your code. Like take your conditional use code, okay? Look at your conditional use code and look at the state code and see if there's a conflict. And if there's a conflict, the state code wins. I mean, it's not a question. The state code wins, right? But as long as what you're doing is not necessarily conflicting, it's okay.
What I'm really asking is when do those bills that have been passed get reduced to state code so that when you do go look at state code to see if there's a conflict, you know that from year 2020 that's already incorporated, that I'm not going back looking for bills for 10 years.
Yeah, so the state legislature's website is the best, is great. It's fantastic. And I was, ever since I became a land use attorney 25 years ago, I've spent so much time on that thing, right? And so you want to go on the state legislature's website. There's a ton of ways to search, but once you search, you can find the final version of finally passed bills by looking for the word enrolled. Once you see the word enrolled on a bill text, then you know that that's the final version.
Let me just clarify. All of these bills, unless stated otherwise, because some of them will say they take effect at a specific date, everything else takes effect on May 3rd. It's 60 days after the legislature ends. So all these bills we're talking about haven't yet taken effect, although actually I think one did take effect before.
Yeah.
But generally it's 60 days after the session ends. But you saw the few of the bills don't take effect till later in the year expressly. But otherwise, it's all 2 months. So if you go to Utah Legislature, Google Utah Legislature, you'll get the current version of the code.
What I'm really asking is, if a year later I go look at, I don't want to look at that bill, I want to look at the code. Will it have been incorporated?
Are you talking about if last year's bill was changed by this year? Because I guarantee it was.
It's about when it gets incorporated. So on the website where you look up Utah code.
Christina's gonna help with this.
I was gonna say, yeah, just when you go on the website and you look up the Utah code, right, online, it will have the current version, but at the bottom, there's a little streamer that says this has been updated by the bill. You can click on that and see what the changes are. But you will see them incorporated as of the May 3rd date. That will then be what's on the website. Did I answer right?
Till 11:30.
All right, we're gonna let Ryan take over because what he's gonna talk about is also important to incorporate into your codes for sure.
All right, my job here is to really get this group talking because we've got a group of experts here. You are the experts. My job is to facilitate it. So I am working on a project called Land Use Review for Attainable Housing with the Department of Workforce Services, Housing and Community Development. Wave your hand, Christina. And again, I am with Envision Utah. So I think we all know the problem here. We can't afford our homes. We can't afford the homes in Utah. I mean, look at some of these numbers, some of these income required to purchase the median price home in Utah. In 2022, $183,000. Household, I don't know what your household makes, but I'm not there. So, I couldn't afford a home here. But, our home ownership's just out of reach. 2020, 73% of renters were priced out of the median home. We know we have a shortfall of units, so.
You and I were just talking about our adult children who can't find a place to live.
I have a 24-year-old that lives in her bedroom upstairs still. She wants to move out.
Yeah, same here.
So again, we've been going through this process. We have met with I would say a group of about 60 what I would consider housing and planning and zoning experts, developers, planners, people from the city's attorneys, Craig, Wilf, Brent. We've all reached out for interviews. But what we're doing is we're looking at about 35 different regulations from all of the AOGs, cities and towns within all the AOGs, to come up with recommendations about how we can crack this nut. So I'll be quick on this super busy slide. The bottom line here is Utahns have been optimistic about growth until 2021, and that shifted. Utahns are no longer optimistic about growth. So that is a big problem because we have a high birth rate and we're a very desirable place to live. So, and we can see that housing and cost of living is a top priority for Utahns. I mean, it comes right to the top of the list. Housing and cost of living, right after water. We're the third driest state in the nation. I get it, but housing has jumped right up there in front of air quality, in front of education. Notice how our cities and towns grow is on that list too. So I don't want to say, at all costs housing. We still need to maintain our, our heritage and our community culture and the values there. But so this is the top priority, but this is how Utahns rate how we're doing with housing and cost of living, the very bottom of all those important things. So I think we can all feel it. This is just some numbers to back it up. So I mentioned we got that stakeholder, those expert stakeholders, our focus group together from all around the state. Let me see. And their number one, we asked them, what approaches should be facilitated by regulation to help improve housing affordability and satisfy community values? More missing middle housing jumped right to the top of the list. You can see below that smaller lots, smaller homes. Those are all kind of missing components of the missing middle. The other one down towards the bottom that jumped up was more flexible zoning and more flexible zoning in our ordinances to allow housing in more places. So I'm gonna, this is a good slide, but I'm gonna skip it because we.
Oh, it looks good.
Yeah, I'm skipping it. It takes about 4 minutes to get through it. So we are going through these, like I said, all around the state, 35 different ordinances. This is what we've been told to look at. So I'm going to ask this group the same question because we need to know what we're scouring for to make recommendations. Allowed use, the number of units, we're looking for accessory dwelling units, we're looking at our townhomes, multifamily allowed. Is it single family only? We're looking at the physical form. What are we talking about? Garage widths or driveway widths and garage spaces and what about the parking situation? We're looking at the building dimensions, height, the footprint, the floor area ratio. What are the setbacks? So to this gentleman's point over here, we've also heard about the process and the time for approval. And I think you hit the nail right on the head, is that it's probably not a huge part of the cost. However, that is something we heard. And so then we're also looking at exactions. So, so we have, I'm gonna skip, I realize that top bullet, lack of collaboration and shared housing standards between, I realize that bullet as I'm sitting at a ULUI. I understand that's a little hypocritical, but that is something we heard. Single family consumes nearly all of the residentially zoned areas. I pulled from a rapidly growing city. There's 11 types of residential zones, only 2 of those allowed multifamily. So a couple of bullet points. We're finding a lot of outdated ordinances. I thought this one was great in rural town A. Single family zone allows for detached servants' quarters, but not accessory dwelling units. So I'm not going to call out rural town A. However, I thought it was a
Volunteer, who is it? Come on.
okay. Brent and I's goal was really to get this group talking, and hopefully, how many times during a presentation do they say, pull out your phones, please pull out your phones, scan the QR code that you see. Let's get your input on this.
This is really fun, by the way, if you have never done it.
We just have 3 questions. We won't kill you here, but we want to get this group talking. So please scan the QR code. If you happen to be on another device, you can go to slido.com and enter the number that you see on the screen. I'll give you just 1 second to get signed up. Okay, so on your phones, and I'll give you a second, what regulations or ordinances have the most significant impact on housing affordability? Think about if you're from a city or a town, think about this.
This one's for Tooele for sure.
And so I'm going to ask for volunteers here, so be ready. And I can tell people are participating. I can see 20 people are typing right now. If you see one, Brent, that peeks here, let's just grab one.
So a lot of people have said zoning, and that's pretty general, right? I mean, yes, that's true. But what about zoning?
Someone speak up, please. We'll bring the microphone, I promise.
Jason, go ahead.
When you say what about zoning, I agree with the comment over here that a lot of the things that went through state legislature won't have much of an impact on affordability. Everything starts with land. Land is the most important component of the entire build stack. So when you say what about zoning, it is increasing zoning to match affordability, which can only happen in a conversation. So Jordan had made a comment about access. We cannot have discussions about affordability without access to city councils, who are the true decision makers. Builders are just manufacturers. People have to understand that about the process. So that's what about zoning.
So several people have said density. I mean, is that basically what you're saying?
Yes.
Is allowing more density?
allowing more density is going to be your quickest. So for
Because
example.
that allows more units on the same land that you bought for the same price. So
Yeah. For example, right, in the building industry, there's a common, I guess, standard, right, that land is 25% of the home price at the end of the day. And that all needs to stay about the same, right? You can't have this really skewed, land being 50% of the end home sales price. So if that's the case, and you go from a half-acre lot to a quarter-acre lot, in those cases, you can save, I've done the math, I'm a home builder, right? We can save $180,000 going from a half-acre lot to a quarter-acre lot in the cost stack just by dealing with land. So it's significant, and it's the one thing that we can control, right? We can't control mortgage rates, but we can control land use.
Bruce? I pointed at Bruce, sorry.
Bruce.
I should probably let you pick who answers next.
So I think it was 2 years ago, I was on a conference call with several senators, people from the PRC, and others concerning condominiums. And what could this state do to facilitate density by increasing the construction of condominiums? And the legislators thought that the HOA industry, my industry, was the cause of the lack of condominiums in the state because they might get sued. The developers admitted that's not what keeps us from building condominiums. It's financing. It's the financing problem that they have when they're trying to finance a condominium versus a townhome project that's keeping that, and also the economy when they realize that they can build a condominium, finance it as one structure as opposed to multiple structures, and they'll still build as a condominium, and they'll rent out the entire condominium for 20 or 30 years before they resell it. And that is what is keeping at least that component of affordable housing and density out of the market. And so the legislature, if they want to, they chose not to when I talked to them, to deal with some financing options, but that's the only way you're going to solve some of those problems.
Interesting.
Comment in the back.
She handed me the mic. I'll be quick. One of the things the legislature passed this year, which wasn't mentioned this morning, is a first-time homebuyer assistance program where the state will give the homebuyer $20,000 to be used towards down payment, closing costs, even financing to buy down the interest rate. If the new home, only applies to new construction, is priced at $450,000 or less, and you meet certain eligibility requirements on your income. That's a great step. I work for Edge Homes now full-time. We build condominiums. We have plenty of products that hit that price point of $450,000 or lower, and we intend to take full advantage of that. I think if the legislature would provide even more incentives like that, you would see builders targeting that price point so that home buyers who couldn't otherwise afford now have $20,000 from the state to buy a home. That's a great step forward.
I agree, Paxton, by the way, that's great. Everyone is, when they hear that, they roll their eyes and say, good luck finding a home at that price point. But I agree that they're out there. And we need to make those available, as local governments. I'm not a local government guy, but local governments need to make those kinds of things available.
So we can increase density to allow developers to put more houses on, but what incentive is there for them to make them affordable? So I think incentives need to be part of that. The city needs to incentivize, we'll give you increased density if a certain percentage will be in the affordability.
I'm going to piggyback on that, Brent, and you've heard me complain about this for a long time. We've had the last several years these moves from the PRC and the development community, like, the one that says, on materials, building materials on single-family homes, right? We can't dictate what materials they use, or design guidelines, or things like that. and all in the name of affordable housing, and this is gonna reduce the price of the housing. And so my question to the Property Rights Coalition was, okay, or reducing impact fees, we've heard that a lot. If you guys don't have to spend as much to build the house because you no longer have to meet certain guidelines, or you don't have to pay fees, are you going to then pass that on to the buyer and reduce the cost of your house? And the answer I got every time was, well, no. It just increases their profits, and they're not going to reduce the price of the house. So how does that address affordable housing?
So that is a great question, and I am involved with the PRC. And PRC is the developer side of this discussion. And I don't disagree with you at all. And I think some of those measures have not necessarily been affordable housing directed or necessarily successful at that, right? But the problem is that we know what the answer is, and we can't get there, in my opinion, right? And the answer is a lot of it's what we're talking about, is density and products that are available at lower price points, okay? Not because of materials or anything else. I mean, that's all profit, and developers have a right to make a profit, right? But of course, when you say things like density, everybody who's involved in the city in the room is saying, I don't want to get murdered, right? Because that's what will happen, right? But that's what we have to do. We have to offer a variety of products. Not everything has to be dense. There has to be townhomes, there has to be apartments, there has to be condos, there has to be third-acre lots, half-acre lots, 5-acre lots. We have to be able to offer those, and every community should be offering all of those, should have the opportunity to offer all those. And that's the solution, or at least that's the best solution we've come up with, and until that happens, the thing that alarmed me so much about this legislative session, I'm sorry for talking so much, was that a lot of what happened didn't come from the developer side of things. It came from the legislators. The legislator said, this is what we're doing, right? Now, not the developers weren't happy about that, right? But it's so, well, they are developers, exactly, right? So many of them are, and there's no question about that. And that's the situation, and that's the situation we have to live in. But the fact that they're developers means that they're going to pass laws that we have to comply with. If you want this to stop coming top down, we need to start moving bottom up. Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to say what I've said forever and ever and ever, and everybody will disagree, but that's okay. Government does not control growth. Government decides where the people that have the money, the desire, and are going to take that risk are going to build and bring growth, or the people that are willing to sell the property that growth can happen on. That's not always nice and neat inside your general plan where you say, I want residential's here, commercial's here, and nobody in commercial wants to sell their property, but somebody in residential does, so now they want a commercial spot in residential, and we've got to make those decisions. But we're not going to drive it unless we drive it straight into the ground, and that's the only direction we have to go.
I agree with that 100%. But a government has a role in it, and developers have a role in it, for sure. And to me, the best situation is when they can find a way to work it, to figure it out together, and not be constantly doing this. And that's just as much the developer's problem as it is a government problem. There's no question.
So the conversation of attainable housing also has to do with rentals, not just affordability to buy.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I'm a real estate agent, and what I'm seeing is we're seeing a ton of restrictions at an HOA level. So we have this not in my backyard attitude, you know, and people don't want density, people don't want attainable housing near them, right? They want it over there. But we're seeing HOAs restricting, so the state legislature will say, hey, ADUs are now allowed, and this is what you have to do to have an ADU, and then the HOA will say, not here. Is there a way that maybe that could become part of the conversation? That I mean, I don't know what the legislature can do to restrict HOA restrictions, but the HOA restrictions, I think, are getting in the way of a lot of the things that are being accomplished.
They already did that. ADUs are allowed, HOAs cannot prohibit ADUs.
So,
HOAs can't prohibit rentals.
This, by the way, is Bruce Jorgensen. He is the top HOA guy in the state, in my opinion, right here.
And repeat what he said, because he doesn't have a mic.
I'll say it louder.
It's online.
We can't hear you online, however loud you say it.
The state has already prohibited associations from prohibiting ADUs. We can't do that. You talk, well, what else do you do with an ADU but rent it out? I mean, the ADU is some space you rent out inside the existing footprint of your home. It's an interior ADU. That's all you do is rent that out. There's no other purpose. You don't have an ADU for your mother or your child. It's an ADU for some other third party. But when you talked earlier, someone did about how this current round of legislation restricted something in cities but not the counties, and maybe that was an oversight. The same thing with associations. It refers to MLUDMA, municipal LUDMA, that you can't, under that, HOAs can't prohibit ADUs. Says nothing
Doesn't
about.
say that in the county?
It doesn't reference the corresponding county act. So anyway, but you really, when I advise clients, they cannot prohibit ADUs in any manner other than what a city could do to limit or restrict ADUs.
All right, I do have two more questions, so.
Let me interrupt for just a second.
All right, Craig.
We anticipated a lively conversation, so the time from 11:30 to noon was set aside for that. I just want to make sure Ryan has the opportunity to complete his thoughts on the subject that he was starting on.
No,
and then
I'm honestly, I love the lively conversation. It's very insightful for me. I do have two more questions, but.
Please, go right ahead.
All right, grab your phones again, and what is the best way to ensure that local land use regulations stay current? We'll update them.
Yeah, right.
For those online who can't see the screen well enough to read it, these poll answers are showing on the screen, and there's a large cluster of similar responses. Maybe we'd ask.
Amen.
We'll ask, maybe Ryan could quote the ones that are causing the most laughter. That'd be quite interesting, too.
Well, I did see on the last slide the availability of cheese.
Yeah.
I was going to call that out, however.
One thing while this is coming up that I would like, a myth I would like to bust is this idea that, well, it's the analysis paralysis, right? This idea that if you're gonna adopt something, it has to be perfect, and in the effort to do that, nothing seems to change, nothing seems to happen. In my opinion, that's not true. Getting 80% of the way there is better than being none of the percent of the way there, because you can always tinker with it and make it better. And so the idea that we cannot figure this out, we cannot get there, we're just paralyzed, and so nothing ends up happening, you just need to get past that and get some improvements in place.
All right, we've seen a lot of comments come through about the state code and simplifying the state code. Does someone want to speak to what they put up there?
Seriously, they're being real mean about that mic, aren't they?
Online audience, our online audience.
So I'm luckily a federal meat plant owner, and I get the privilege of having a government employee in my business every single day, and then going through at least 4 reviews a year of food safety assessments. And they change the regulations just because they feel like it, and it can vary depending on the area of the country we're in and who's the boss of that area. The thing that's helped us most in our business is they used to come out, Texas A&M released a sample of what our HACCP and our SSOP program should look like. Would it not be really helpful if maybe we had a template that the state somewhere literally wrote up what all of this could look like? You're not telling everybody they should do just this. It won't always fit to their, but a template written up that people could go through and compare against, written by the professionals that are both listening to the legislature and do this for a living, that we all had internet access to pull up quickly, that literally made what I do doable.
What's the practicalities of that from your organization standpoint?
Well, I mean, we get a call for templates or model ordinances, and we get as much pushback as, honestly, we get as much pushback as that we hear approval for, just because they say one size doesn't fit all. Maybe it's a good start. I don't know what.
Maybe you can do it by size of city, big city, small city.
Well, I know that when you said a template, I know that Jordan and Rick looked at each other, because that's something that the Ombudsman's office gets asked to do all the time. And I was definitely asked to do that when I was there. I think it would be great. And there was at one time, someone had collected a land use ordinance library where they collected all the land use ordinances in Utah by subject and posted them online. And it was out of date that fast, right? And so anybody who were to put together some kind of checklist or some kind of model ordinances it's gonna be an ongoing, constant job, just like updating your codes are, right?
But it would be one person and a lot of people benefiting.
There's also liability questions about that.
There is.
Okay, and that's one of the reasons why an organization like his is hesitant to do it, is because they don't want to put together an ordinance, have you adopt it, and then they get in trouble.
Please go ahead, Ryan, with your last question.
All right. Think about your city. What are some of the common problems with local ordinances? Call yourself out here. We won't hold you to it.
Oh yeah, all these are great.
Council thinks it's the Bible and should never change it.
I love that. So true. Pick one.
Yeah, let's, someone speak to, I see a lot of complicated coming through here, overly complicated, hard to understand. The definitions, I don't understand the definitions. Someone who wrote that in, someone who typed that in, volunteer your answer here.
Jamie.
You know, definitions are always where we end up fighting. Whether it's here or in Summit County, it doesn't matter where you are. It's the definitions and what does that really mean? And then you get really clever attorneys on the other side. As you know, Brent, we have these fights all the time, and having definitions in your code that say this is what we mean by this word is really helpful in terms of trying to really figure this out and reduce those kind of fights. And if you leave them way too broad, it's just a fight waiting to happen.
I have a comment on that. That's okay. One thing I've told places to do in the past is read a definition out loud to yourself, right? And if it doesn't make sense to you, don't assume that it's okay because it must make sense to some attorney. Your definitions, your code, your whole code, but especially your definitions, are not written for attorneys in your town. They're written for the citizens in your town. So read it out loud to yourself and see if it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, make it make sense. The whole reason I have a job, and Wade Budge and guys like this, is because of bad codes. Most of what we do is because of bad codes.
This one piqued my interest. Developers not attempting to research, the code. We actually heard that. We hear that time and time again. They'll turn something in and expect the city to be the review, And so whoever wrote that up, typed that in, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Over here.
In red.
Let's end this session, and then we'll go ahead with questions and answers. It is 11:30, so hold that thought. Let me give you more people to respond to it. Would those earlier panelists from the morning come and join us on the stage, on the platform, and then we'll go ahead and have 30 minutes of open conversation.
doing it. These were great.
Wait for me to capture. I'll save all this and take it back and look through it.
I don't. We'll make
Make
room.
room. We'll make room.
Despite what she thinks sometimes when we're talking on the phone.
Let's thank Brent and Ryan for their help on this last discussion.
You're the expert. I'm the facilitator.
You did great.
Okay, now where were we? Let's go ahead and start the conversation. Who had-
Right over here, Craig.
Right here? Just a second.
So it's just kind of that generic, we spend 90% of our time working on the 10%, right? So, and maybe not developers as much as engineer, but it's Layton City's fault, I'm just telling them, because they redline stuff. So then they come to, I can do that because he's our same guy, right? But a lot of stuff that's submitted is expecting that the city's just gonna redline it and essentially design every element, right? So you're paying twice, but then in a community that doesn't already have the staff, that back and forth that happens for that one development just takes a ton of time instead of just saying, well, this is how it's done. And so it's interesting when you have somebody that's used to developing in one community, how well that works, right? But then even with the zones, it's like, well, you get somebody else that's like, I want to do whatever I want, wherever I want to, and I want it to look just like we did in the last 4 cities that we worked in, right? Because that's our model, that's how we do business. Then they come and have this big frustrating moment, and then we spend most of our time, and so that's my comment.
I have a client who is upset at me because I have not sued a particular city. And the reason why I have not sued the particular city is because, as I've said to this client 50 times, you have not complied with that city's ordinances yet. And he refuses. So the problem you're talking about is for real. Paxton, Jason, these guys, they understand that what you're talking about is not how a developer is supposed to operate. It's a developer's job to give you a plan. But it happens.
In the development of the new subdivision ordinance, particularly the plan review provisions of the subdivision process, that was a significant part of the discussion, was that it came through loud and clear from the city side that they were tired of getting, and I'll just be colloquial, garbage, and having to try and create something out of the garbage they got. Our hope is that that review process and the structure to it and the requirements on the development community also will help that. In the real world, will it actually take hold? I don't know yet. I'm hopeful that it will. But the one thing I will say is the development community that was in the room for that part of the discussion was quick to jump on the review standard kind of solutions we that we were reacting to, because they acknowledged that there was an issue. And we did hear from a number of, I guess, developers, I won't name them, but they said basically, yeah, we know our guys do that. And they said they would pick up the banner and try to fix that also. Now, you don't have everybody in the room that develops property, and we can't address it with every particular party. But I'm hopeful that those review standards will help with that to some extent. I hope that developers everywhere will take up that obligation to educate themselves a little bit and get oriented before they throw something on the table.
I mean, I really think that that's a byproduct of, in many cities, not all, but in many, you have standards that are not discernible. And so what I mean by that, some people just throw up their hands and just say, well, I'll get the process going and have them start reacting. Now that we have the standards, as Todd just indicated, I'm hoping that we'll bring both together, because now we'll be working from a checklist of those standards, and hopefully then the product that comes will not be the garbage product.
Just kind of a follow-up real-life example for us. We don't have a lot of staff. We have our standards, right? And we need to go to, we feel like we have to define absolutely everything in order to get a good product. So we work with the developer. We did a general plan or a zone change, increased the density so that they could put a 4-unit on this little parcel property. Great project, good use of space. The whole thing came out, no front doors, right? Not even a front door. And we're like, I don't even know if that qualifies for code, or I mean like fire code or whatnot, right?
Building code, yeah.
How did that get missed? Because it's not something you think you would have to look for.
So I have a comment on moderate income housing planning. I've been a planner for 15 plus years, and I've done a lot of things in cities. I've never built one house. I've never built one housing unit. I don't work for Park City. I don't work for a place that does workforce housing. We don't have more money than anything. We're a suburban community up north in Weber County. But what we do is we have a lot of power in the legislative process. And I have watched through, I'll call them not exactions, because that's a bad word, but exchange, negotiation. I've exchanged open space. I've done flushable restrooms. I've done parking lots. I've done all sorts of wonderful things for my community that have come out of the decision-making process, the legislative process, to exchange increased units for whatever thing the community needs over here. And to be frank, with my city council, who is certainly willing to do attached units, we have 27% of our little city is attached units in northern Weber County, talking about we're gonna set a bar, some percentage, and it's gonna be we'll double your density, you're gonna provide 10% moderate income housing units, and we don't care how you do it. And you can do it by LIHTC, you can upcharge certain houses so that you can subsidize others, but I don't feel like it's the city's responsibility to provide moderate income housing. I can control that no less than I can control what the Fed is doing with interest rates. And 2 years ago, you could be in a $600,000 house at 2.7% interest, and now you're in a $350,000 house. We can't control that, but what I can control is I'll give you 4,000 square foot unit homes, single lot homes, all day long. Our council loves them, they think they're great, but some percentage of them, 5%, 10%, whatever the state thinks is reasonable, will come in at 80% AMI. And it is the responsibility of the developers, in my opinion. Now you can take my city out, I haven't said. But in my opinion, it's for them to provide that product. And because I just can't. I don't have the general fund money. We barely have general fund money to just pay for the staff to do all the stuff that the legislature is requiring us to do. So it's a direction that I think some cities are leaning, and we'll see what the development community's response to it is, because I've given lots of increased density for free that has resulted in no amount of affordable units coming out of that. And unless I can see like the pro forma and say, where are you getting, where are you saving these dollars? It's not resulting in affordable units. End of soapbox.
Your story's familiar. And remember, we had, during the 2021 legislative session leading up to that, we had a ton of discussion about ordinance structures that might mandate affordable housing for some level of entitlement, I guess. And actually the development community was not in favor of that kind of a structure for the most part. They didn't like it. And I'm really familiar with stories where cities have entitled properties with unlimited density, no cap on the density, and they're getting 4-story structures. And that's not a heavy density thing, and they're right around transit stations, right? So the levers that cities can pull right now certainly are limited. And I don't disagree. I agreed with one or two things Brent said. I don't remember which ones they were. But I can say that because we're friends. And it's true.
We were friends.
But it's also true. But you know, the legislature can only pull so many levers. Cities have even fewer we can pull. The legislature's funding is a different mechanism than cities that have to be in a balanced budget, right? We have to be legally. And the way the state operates, well, it needs balance, is different. But one of the levers that we aren't effective in pulling in this state yet is addressing the cost difference between building up. We haven't figured out how to skin that cat yet, and I actually think that one might be able to affect some things, but we're not there yet. And you know, I've heard a lot of people say everything we've done in the legislature isn't going to change the price of any house by a nickel, and that's true. But if we can put more inventory into the market, will that help us turning over the bottom part of the housing inventory to where we get more affordable? I'll be candid, that has not worked in any state that's tried it. Perhaps it works here given what some market conditions look like, I don't know. But we're pulling the levers I think we can pull, or we're starting to identify what they are and trying to work on those. But I have a sense that going up and the cost difference between going from stick building to metal frame, you know, all those building code issues, I have a sense that might actually be something that could be impactful. But we haven't figured out how to get to that yet at a level in our state.
Well, and Todd's onto something. I mean, incentives is the correct way to address the affordable housing gap that we are all talking about. And going from type 1 to type 2 construction, which is what he's talking about, is one way to do that. There's only one city that I'm aware of that has now incentivized that, and your partner's working on that deal. And
the money behind that deal is extraordinary too.
it is, but it's an extraordinary cost, because what we're talking about is you literally could uncap density, but you'll never get over vineyard. Yeah.
The HTRZ and vineyard is the one way.
Yeah, HTRZ and vineyard. What it is there's a natural bar, because you can go stick frame to 6 stories above a parking structure, so you don't ever get a building taller than 80 feet. But if you were to incentivize going to type 2 construction, then you can achieve those kind of yields where all of a sudden you have a supply, because that's what we're always fighting in Utah, is an undersupply. That's the market reality that creates the whole affordable housing gap. And so, you know, looking for ways to incentivize different housing, the delivery of different housing types is the way to start eating away at the problem.
One of the ways.
Did you write about that?
Tax code's another way, with both investors and second homeowners, keeping taxes higher there. And then also a thing that I see a lot is the Greenbelt. We have a lot of property in Greenbelt that's not being used as Greenbelt, and they're getting massive tax deductions for that. Those landowners would be ready to sell in a heartbeat if they were paying full value property tax for that.
That is a good point, but it's a scary point.
There's a third rail. Somebody want to touch that?
Yeah. That's a good point.
We all want to jump in on tax policy.
And please do it now, because you're online permanently when whatever you say in this meeting.
Actually, Craig, I want to pipe in just a little bit here. You know, Summit County has a 20% affordable housing requirement. So they're actually higher than what you were talking about. There is a mandatory 20% affordable housing component to every development that comes in.
In a grandfathered ordinance, by the way.
In a grandfathered ordinance, yes.
That nobody else can do right now.
That nobody else can do. But it's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
But the reason it works there is because of the land values. We were talking about the land values earlier, right? And the way you get, but it's incentivized. It's also what Wade was talking about. The way they do that is by incentivizing the density, increasing the density, going vertical, and they're able to get that 20% by the incentives they give back. And it's turned out, it's worked. I mean, I think they've done affordable housing really well. That people complain about Summit County, but the one thing they've done really well is the affordable housing, and they've really focused on it. And as a governmental entity, they have been able to acquire that kind of affordable housing. Most jurisdictions, though, don't have the land values that are there in Park City and Summit County, especially on the west side of the county, that are so incredibly expensive. And so, you know, affordability becomes different in, you know, San Juan County that it is up there, or it's different, you know, in Fillmore than it is in Park City because of the land values. So the tools that are available and can be incentivized may not be available for everybody.
I'll touch a little bit of the third rail of tax policy, something that we commonly experience with our homeowner or property owners will come and ask us where our improvements are and stuff like that, and they're on single acre lots, massive lots, and we walk them through this process of showing how we spend probably twice the amount of their property taxes they pay to the city in streets and roads maintenance, and that doesn't cover public safety or any of the other costs. So I mean, if homeowners on the single family dwellings were paying the full cost of servicing, I think that might change some of the attitudes that people have towards higher density, because like, oh, it's extremely expensive to do that, but if we cut our lot in half and add another house, you've dropped your tax liability in half as well. So just a thought.
Can I just make a comment? 30 some years ago, I sat on a committee for housing affordability put together by Governor Levitt. 30 years ago. And believe it or not, the issues were identical and the solutions are identical. On the one hand, either you mandate that development provide affordable housing, either through, there were impact fees in Park City, Summit County, and then they went to a code that provides that you will provide 20% of your housing stock that you build in affordable housing. So that's a mandate. And it became clear in our negotiations with the PRC that they wanted to be compensated, and the word was fully compensated for the difference between the affordable housing units that they were building and what they could sell them for on the market. So we were at a standstill there. There's standoff, whatever you want to call it. On the other side of it, the other solution is subsidization by local government. Whether it comes through density, whether it comes through actual financial incentives, whether it comes through a break in impact fees, whatever it happens to do, the other solution to the problem is density, or is subsidy, sorry. On the Hill right now, the philosophy is that density is going to solve the affordable housing problem. However, there's nothing further from the truth, because the market is going to determine what the value of a home is, no matter how much we decrease impact fees or we provide incentives, for doing the things that we do. It is not going to change what you ultimately can sell that home for. It just doesn't. That's the reality. So even speeding up the process it's going to help. It's going to help put more homes into the marketplace, which is a good thing. That is a good thing. But if we expect it to affect affordability, it's just not going to do it. The market's going to make that determination. However, there is something in between the two. And the thing in between the two is what I've seen happen down in South Salt Lake and in other areas where cities and developers have gotten together and have come somewhere in between the two, subsidization and mandate. And Ivory Homes has a development in South Salt Lake, I think it is. They came together with the city. They were able to compromise. They were able to use tax increment financing. They were able to put together every tool they could, and the two of them came to a conclusion that actually did result in actual affordable housing units being produced in that particular jurisdiction. And so I think that's going to be the answer. If either one of us mandate on each other, what we're talking about, if you mandate subsidization on municipalities by absolutely requiring increased density, that is going to increase the number of units, but it will not provide housing affordability. It just doesn't work that way. Or if you mandate on the other side a developer that he has to provide them without any compensation, that's never going to fly. It has to be that negotiated middle ground that occurs between the developer and municipalities and government.
Agree.
Amen.
So just to make sure that's not confusing, Todd said no, and you said you could mandate with compensation for additional density. And I just want to be clear on this, because to me, one of the only ways we really get the affordable housing is to require it, whether that's negotiation or that's some kind of a mandate where you're also compensating them with more density or something. But I think that needs to be cleared up because it's very tenuous in my mind in terms of what can you really do.
You can't mandate it right now without some kind of background. The state law says you can't. I mean, we all do this, but the state law says we can't. So you can reach an agreement with a developer on doing it, and since the mandate was put, the negative mandate was put in place that said you can't do that, there are still projects that are being planned for and agreed to. I don't know of any that are formally entitled yet, but there are some in the works that have affordable housing components to them, but they're a matter of agreement between the parties. And, there's some apartment builders. I know Wade represents a couple who do a significant number of affordable units. They're on the ground in a couple of communities that I'm associated with, and I know they're working on things. But a city cannot tell a developer X percentage of your units have to be affordable housing under the state law right now, unless you have a grandfathered ordinance.
In the code.
And so, I don't remember which 21 bill that was, Gary. If Cam were here, he can give us a number. Carson, can you?
Sorry, which?
It was the 21 affordable housing bill that prohibited us from imposing a mandate, the inclusionary zoning stuff.
I think that was the land use task force bill I think that was last year, wasn't it? 2022.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you have any more, Todd? Okay. I wanted to ask, we being the league, we talk to our members a lot about housing policy. We frequently hear cities saying, look, we're concerned about our housing stock, we're trying to change our zoning, we're trying to give more allowance for smaller lots, and what we're seeing is just larger homes get built on those smaller lots and at the same price point. Obviously that's the market driven, that's their prerogative. I also hear from this room, from other builders and developers saying we want to build smaller units, we want to build more affordable. Obviously, these are sometimes occurring in different places. The market dictates a lot, even on a given month. But how do we work together to try to address this problem? Because I think we're oftentimes saying the same thing, and it often just becomes a fist fight at the Capitol. But I think we want the same outcome. And how do we partner to try to address this issue?
That's a great question, $1 million question.
Well, what's the great answer?
I think he has it.
Oh, okay.
Jason knows.
Well, now turn to the private sector.
I don't have the great answer.
We waited all that time.
But I think it's important, and I like that question's been asked, and that is, a lot of times we as builders and developers in the community, we come to the table and we ask to have the negotiation. We really don't have access. That is the problem, and that is a solution that should be talked about and worked out, is how can we create access? Because just last week I had this conversation, and it went like this, right? We reached out to a city council member because they're a decision maker, and they replied back in an email, right? And it basically says, hey, we have a process, right? You need to go back to staff and work through a process to get to me, right? Now, when we go to staff, what do they say? We don't have any control over this. The city council ultimately is the decision maker. And essentially what happens is I'm going to call it hiding behind each other, because I don't know what else to call it, right? But that is the problem, and we run into it every time. We will, your question about will the developer, right, actually reduce the price? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. I really do believe that.
You're the first one that's ever said that.
True.
But I'm okay with that. And the reason why is because the discussions, the points that have been made is like, okay, if I'll give you the incentive, will you do it? The answer is yes, because if you come to the table and you actually negotiate that, the developers will work with it. It's just that we don't have that opportunity, and it's really hard to get it.
I want to piggyback a little bit on that before we take the next question, because I think there are developers that really do want to help solve the problem. And I will give you the example. We have a developer here in St. George that, you know, was concerned about, especially in the last year when the prices just, you know, exploded down here. He was building homes and really trying to keep the costs down so that he could sell them at a reasonable price for, you know, young couples and first-time home buyers and the school teachers and the police and that kind of thing. And what ended up happening is he sold the home at a reasonable price, only to have them 2 weeks later turn around and flip it and increase the price by about $200,000. What that brings to me is the other component of deed restrictions on some of these affordable units, and really using the deed restrictions so that you can keep them low for a while and keep that inventory in play for a while. And as we have the communications with development, and as we do these, and if we can bring them online and have these conversations and negotiations, make sure that everyone understands it's really critical to keep those in play for a long time and having the deed restrictions in place.
Thank you.
I think that's a good comment, and I think in the short term, that is something that would be important to utilize. In the long term, we have to increase supply. Like if there are 10 buyers and we as builders put 20 homes up, what do you think the price is gonna do?
Right.
It's going down. It's that we're always behind the supply issue right now, and so we really do need, you know, the municipalities to work with the development community to increase the supply, not just here and there, and, you know what I mean, like significantly increase supply.
So, can I make a comment or just a question to that? Right now, I think it was, I can't remember, Kim Gardner's study that showed that there were 113,000 approved permits this last year. 4 years, last 4 years. And we have 111,000 entitled lots that currently exist. Why are they not being built? In Layton, I've got maybe, I think last time our CD director looked at it, we've got close to 2,000 entitled but not built lots. And so I get the financing thing, but
Oh, don't even go there, wait.
but these are entitled,
They're paper lots, and that's one of the things that we're running into. And so if you're trying to look into the future and what it is that we need to be focusing on in order to take these entitled lots and make them into actually improved lots on which others can build, that is making sure we're making available the financing in order to be able to put in those improvements, which are almost all public improvements, be they roads, wet utilities, and other items. And so I think that's what a lot of people in the development community are focusing on right now. Sir, with the hat.
So we have, in our city, we have about 600 entitled lots that aren't paper lots, though. They're improved, the roads, the infrastructure is completely in on at least half of those, or somewhere close to half of those. And we still don't have anything being built. And we really don't have any control over a lot of those things. The other thing that really becomes an issue is when you're talking about development agreements and coming up with these exchanges in density, or having these agreements in place that say, hey, if you want to build this development, you know, put in a certain number of affordable housing. We had a couple of those happen, and a couple of those agreements were in place, and then the developer said, well, a new developer bought those properties and then said, well, that agreement is ambiguous and we don't really agree with it. And so what used to be 20 affordable housing lots is now 3, and then we negotiated to a level of 8 out of 20. And so the supply, this argument that the supply doesn't exist, or that the ability to build those doesn't exist, is garbage, because we have those agreements in place, and then the developer wants to argue about whether the agreement actually exists or whether it's valid. And so you have these affordable housing plans, everybody agrees, and then 6 months, a year down the road, no one agrees anymore, and those affordable housing units don't get built, and then the city's the bad guy because we don't supply those.
But really, in Summit County, the affordable projects aren't affordable anyway. So I don't really know what the answer is.
Well, the
Does that
area
make sense?
median income is really high.
It does make sense.
Thank you. Let's give our panel hearty applause. Thank you.